Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Neil Volz of the Our Voice podcast. Man, I'm excited to be with you tonight. Got a great guest. You might notice that Desmond's not with us just yet. Let me tell you something. Today has been a busy day, like all of our days. I know we have had the bus has been visiting some universities over the last couple of days. We had a job fair, and we're giving out fines and fees receipts up in Jacksonville today, down in Southwest Florida, where I just got in from. We had a job fair where dozens of people with past convictions were getting jobs. People were getting registered to vote. There's just such a great movement here happening with our returning citizen family. So welcome to the Our Voice podcast. I'm going to introduce our guest in just a second. But this is your first time to the Our Voice podcast. This is a podcast for and about returning citizens. People have been directly impacted by the criminal justice system. This is a place and a space for us to have real conversations, for us to kind of dig into those things that might be happening in the news, might be happening around the world, but doing it from the perspective of, those of us who have been impacted by the system and how those things impact us. So I'm going to introduce our guest here. We're going to start our conversation, part one of today's podcast, and then Des is going to jump in with both of us for the second part of this podcast. But let me tell you a little bit about Josh before I bring him on. Josh Hoe, he is the policy analyst for Safe and Just Michigan. He is also the host of Decarceration Nation podcast. Desmond and I have actually been on the podcast with Josh. Had a great time. Really dug into some issues. Talked about Amendment 4. I'm sure we'll kind of talk through some of those things here tonight. He helped with the passage of the Federal First Step Act, which a lot of us are familiar with. He worked to expand Michigan's expungement laws, including clean slate expungement. Michigan's really been a leader in a lot of criminal justice issues, and Josh has had his hands on a lot of those things. I look forward to learning from him, getting some insight from him. He also worked on passing the recommendations of Michigan's Joint Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Incarceration. Another point that I know for me, usually I hear task force and I think not a lot of action, but in Michigan, they've proven that otherwise. And just real quick, some of Josh's background. He holds a master's degree in international affairs and served as director of programs at the University of Michigan. Oh, what's up, Ohio State folks out there? I know. Look what happens, man. We build bridges on this show between Ohio State and Michigan people. We can talk a little bit about that too, Josh. So anyway, without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce to our voice audience, Josh Hoe. What's going on, man? How are you doing?
Hey, Neil, go blue.
I had to start it with that. That hurts.
Couldn't resist. We got a few weeks before we're going to find out what ends up happening.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Is there a question here? Like, I'm curious. Like, what is the appropriate amount of dehumanization that is pertinent with college sports? I'm not sure that we want to dig into that, but I do realize that's a big rivalry, and that's kind of a funny topic.
In theory, it's a big rivalry. In actuality, it hasn't been much of a rivalry in a while. I'm hopeful that it'll at least be a rivalry this year.
Hey, dude, you all are playing some great defense up there. I know that for sure. You got me nervous. Should be a good game.
You all are playing a lot of good everything. That game against Purdue, you made them look like a high school team.
Oh, man. Well, it's fun. I love the fact that we both share that passion for college sports, man. So let me just kind of throw it out there a little bit, man. You are passionate leader, helping make change. How did all that passion, how did all that come about, man? What drives you when it comes to engaging in these issues, man? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I probably am just like most people in the general population before I got arrested. I knew a little bit about criminal justice issues. I knew a lot about like constitutional issues, but only in the theoretical sense, not really in the everyday, like how it applies to people kind of way. And I thought I understood things, but you get a whole different understanding. And then when I was like 42, I got arrested. And it was the first time I'd ever come into contact with the justice system in any way, really. I think I got maybe one ticket before that in 42 years. And, most of the work I do has very little to do with what I experienced personally in the sense of what happened to me. I've been one of the luckiest people in the world. I mean, I had a number of tough years, But after that, I came out of it. I've gotten national employment. I've gotten, good state employment. I've been able to reenter. I've been able to do all those things. Really, my passion for it comes from the fact that I lived through those years in prison and saw from the minute I went into the courts all the way through to reentry to living with 7 other guys in a house, for 7 years, what it's like for most people, and seeing all the flaws in the system up close and seeing how terrible it is and the kind of dehumanization and destruction and just total lack of hope for so many people. I just couldn't not care about that. And I'd been lucky enough to have spent most of my life prior to being incarcerated teaching other people how to be effective legislators, lawyers, and activists. And so I had a skill set, and I really never intended for it to become a living. I was doing it on the side. I was trying to do other things. I tried like 20 other things, and it turned out that I was getting pretty good at it, and people started hiring me to do stuff, and I was making more money as an active, doing that kind of legislative and policy work and messaging work than I was doing the other stuff that I was trying to do. And so since that's what I really wanted to do anyway, and that was most of the things I really was passionate and cared about, I just kind of decided, okay, well, I'll try and do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's pretty much been what I've been doing ever since.
So when did you kind of jump all in then, right? Because it's interesting to hear you discuss things like, hey, man, I do some kind of messaging work. I do this legislative work. I do this advocacy stuff. And the truth is you do a little bit of all those things. I think about our conversation, me, you, and Des on your podcast, and in which we really talked about how all those things play together, right? How, to understand the narrative at work and to understand that there's a real disconnect between how we see each other, and that there is dehumanization that's built into the system that then creates these unjust processes and systems that distort the way, it feeds this cycle. So I'm curious, like when did you just kind of jump in with both feet and say, hey man, this is what I'm doing?
That's a good question. I guess it was probably when I started working as a consultant on the First Step Act, and I started really getting a lot of traction. And I started to see that even someone in my position, given skills and other things, could be successful and could move the needle. And once I believed that, I was doing work that could make a difference and impact people, it became very easy to want to do that all the time. And luckily, I'm proud, I know people who've done this work for 40 years and maybe had like 3 victories. In the first 5 years, I think I was involved in passing over 40 pieces of legislation. And so a lot of that's probably luck. I'm not saying that I have some kind of innate skill set that's, but I've been lucky enough to be at least adjacent to so much work that got done that, it's hard not to stay excited about it every day, to know, with the expungement stuff, when Clean Slate goes into effect, between that and the expansion of automatic expungement in Michigan, some people have suggested that as many as 1 million people in Michigan could be impacted. Just to be able to be part of trying, something that might help 1 million people, it's just wonderful. It fills you with joy to know that people can walk into an apartment complex for the first time and feel like they might actually have a chance to get an apartment, or they can walk into a job interview and not feel like the first thing that's going to happen is the person's going to shut them down because of their criminal record. To me, that makes it all worthwhile. If even one person can walk in and get a job because of work that I and other people are doing, that makes it worth it to me.
We'll talk about that a little bit, right? So when you start talking about record clearing, right, you start talking about clean slate, you start talking about expungement reform, right? You're talking about giving hope to people who right now, right? I was literally, today with dozens of employers, dozens of people who are looking for work. And there was a lot of process, that went behind the scenes to make sure that these employers are hiring second chance jobs, making sure that they're hiring people with past convictions, because we don't actually have that environment in this state yet. Right, where it's kind of like that that information gets sealed, or that information, that the process actually could just block somebody, right, from even getting access to an application or to an interview, I should say, let alone to a job. So talk about kind of what that process was like. How'd you put those pieces together? Because you're right. When I look at Michigan and a handful of other states, you're really leading the way as it relates to kind of record clearing, which we know, all the data shows. We don't necessarily need to see the data because we live it, but we know that provides real opportunities for somebody to move forward with their lives. And when folks are really invested in the community and have hope in their future, we see recidivism rates are impacted dramatically by that. But how did you guys put that package together? What was the thought behind it? Because I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned for those of us who want to see those things happening here in Florida or in other states.
Well, I think, first of all, everyone who's on this, who's listening to this podcast, who's ever been directly impacted, knows what it feels like to walk into a job interview and feel like you have no hope. I've done that, probably 20 times. I had a master's degree and a lot of experience as a program director, running a system that, that was worth millions of dollars. So, you'd think, and I couldn't even get a job bussing tables for like 5 years. And so, everybody who's been through this knows that there's that period where it just seems like there's no hope at all. And so that's where the passion part comes from, is knowing that common experience of all of us. But what really I think makes the difference is that nothing gives lie to this idea that what states and the federal government are trying to do, or what employers are trying to do, is create public safety. Nothing gives lie to that idea more than denying people a job. The most important things you can do to ensure public safety when someone returns from incarceration are give them a good job and make sure they have safe housing. If you do those two things, the likelihood that they'll remain, committed, that they'll have hope and invest in what's going on in a good way in our communities goes way up. I mean, every bit of data, every data point says that. And so I think one of the things we did that was really important is really focus on the public safety aspect of expungement and the value of getting people employment and getting people housing. The second thing is, and I think right now at this exact moment in time, there has never been a better time to try to get people employers to engage in second chance hiring. We have an incredible labor shortage. Many economists have suggested that it is going to be a long-term labor shortage and get worse because of demographic problems, because of the population aging, because of a lot of things. And that means that a lot of employers, in order to continue to grow their businesses, or at least have businesses that are profitable, are going to have to look into labor markets that they have not looked at before. And one of the largest available pools of labor is formerly incarcerated people. And so there's really never been a better time for state economies to be involved in trying to build a relationship with the formerly incarcerated community than right this second. And so the second thing, I think it's a jobs message, and I think it's an economic message. And I think it's critical that, a good friend of mine, Jeff Korzenik, wrote a book that explains all this. Untapped Talent is the name of the book. And if you really, he's an economist at Fifth Third Bank. And if you really want to understand the economics of why, for a business owner, this is the time that you need to be interested in hiring formerly incarcerated people, and why it's critical if you want your business to continue to grow and to be profitable, that's a book I would definitely recommend. And it's something I would definitely push for the reasons why this work needs to be done.
We've talked to Jeff.
Those are the two main.
And he's been very helpful in terms of kind of like providing information and data points and his life experience as it relates to, policy issues that we're pushing here in Florida. So I hear what you're saying, that you kind of had those two big pieces. One of the things that I've noticed, right, is, and I'm curious how you guys overcame it, is that many people who don't have any experience with the criminal justice system, right? I don't think they understand the, nonstop punishment system that we have, right? So I know when I was in front of the judge, I wasn't told like, hey, you're going to lose your right to vote. You're going to lose access to a whole bunch of housing. Your ability to get employed is going to be impacted, right? Like those pieces weren't actually discussed. And yet for many of us, those collateral consequences are things that become the hurdles to being treated like just anybody else in society, which is ultimately the goal, right? But at the backbone of that is a misunderstanding or an ignorance, willful or not, of people who don't understand what our desire for punishment, I say our collectively, meaning in a society, not necessarily yours nor mine, but a desire for punishment that then feeds this beast that just does not stop, right? I see it all the time even with friends and people who want to be helpful. Like we're doing a lot of work around job licensing reform, for instance, where we want to make sure that people with past convictions can be treated like anyone else in the marketplace. And that includes not being denied job licenses. And yet even friends will say, well, maybe we could wait 5 or 7 years. And I'm kind of like, well, who deputized you to be an extension of law enforcement and continue this punishment at exactly the moment when our lives will say it and all the data will say it, that this is when people need that opportunity. And if given an opportunity, our entire community benefits. How did you guys beat through that headwind?
I don't ever understand what people think the alternative is. Waiting 5 or 7 years tells the people returning that they have no hope. And when people have no hope, what do they turn to?
Right.
If people, all they know before is economic dislocation, trauma, and pain, and that turned them to whatever crimes they committed or addiction or whatever the heck was the reason they got in the justice system, and you bring them back and say, you have nothing again, how do you expect them to live a different life? That's just, you have to give people hope for a better life. If you don't give people hope for a better life, they will not commit to a different lifestyle.
And is that the message that you guys brought to bear? Right? Because, I see it when I'm having, again, with people who think they're being friendly. They're like, well, hey, man, that's the politics of it. We can't necessarily change that. And it's kind of like, man, that's God. People told us you couldn't pass Amendment 4 too, right? So, man, we got to live on hope, and we got to believe the impossible is possible. But it sounds like
there's also kind of two stories of politics. I don't mean to bust in. I'm sorry to break in, but there's kind of two stories of politics. There's the politics is the art of the possible, which is this notion that you can never do anything beyond what's already currently imaginable. But then there's also this notion of both of like the Overton window and continuing to expand it. And we've seen throughout times that there are paradigm shifts and there are moments in times when you can go beyond what people thought was conventionally possible. I was at a film festival for the First Step, which is a documentary about the First Step Act.
I've seen,
and at one point, one of the panelists, the moderator of our panel asked me, was doing all the work for the First Step Act, was it worth it? And I was like, well, 17,000 people so far have come home from it. So yeah, I'd say it's pretty worth it. I think people's understanding of these things is, everybody said we could never pass the first. Everybody said we could never pass the First Step Act. At every step, I was involved for like 2 years in trying to get that thing passed, and there were at least 6 times where the thing was dead. And it should never have happened based on all conventional, but somehow it did. There are hundreds of examples throughout history, just a history of our legislatures in the state and federal legislatures, of examples where things seemed impossible but became possible because of the combination of a lot of elements, but certainly because of the creativity and passion of the people who were continuing to work to make sure they get passed. And if you discount that, if you just give into the cynicism of the realism of politics ends at the water's edge, it can never be more, then nothing's ever going to change. And if we believe nothing's ever going to change, then, I think, that can't be the business we're in.
Yeah, right. We believe in change at our core, right? How can we possibly accept that as reality?
Yeah, I just flat refuse to believe that it's impossible to make change beyond kind of realist ideas of change.
Yeah, so let me shift this a little bit, right? Because you and I have had some conversations. I know we like to have these discussions on Twitter as well. And you've got some pretty strong views on kind of how the media portrays people impacted by the criminal justice system and issues that revolve around the lives of people impacted by criminal justice issues, right? And I've got some pretty strongly held views as well. But I'd love to like kind of talk to you from that perspective. I mean, we are currently in a space right now with the Rittenhouse case, the Aubrey case. Here in Florida, there's a variety of pretty high profile cases that we've seen that actually result in kind of seeing that Willie Horton effect, or seeing, legislation actually get introduced in response to a specific instance that has been fueled by, kind of the media glare and how the reporting happens. I'm curious if you could give us a little bit of kind of your insight. I think you had mentioned kind of Columbia. You had put some stuff together with Brian Stevenson. Kind of talk to us a little bit about how the media is creating headwinds and tailwinds as it relates to trying to implement change in the criminal justice system.
Well, I think first there's a few kind of caveats that I would put into place. The first one is that, there are a lot of people who do really good work who are journalists.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot of people at the Marshall Project who I'm friends with. There's a lot of people around the country who do a lot. There's people at Reason. There's tons of people who do a lot of really great work. The second thing I'll say is that the media environment is really tough right now. You've got a situation where they haven't really figured out a successful business model for news, and they're, constantly, hiring too few reporters to do too many jobs, and that creates a situation where your crime beat reporter has to turn to the same old sources for information as quickly as possible every single time. And so almost always the only people they talk to are prosecutors and police. And that's partially because the police were smart, and decades ago they realized that if they created their own media offices and they were always ready to respond, that would make sure that their narrative was the one that was dominant and mostly heard. And so in the traditional media space, in the traditional news space, most often what you hear is only police and prosecutors' perspectives. Every once in a while, a good reporter will do the extra work to try to find activists, people to talk back, things like that. But those have to be people, if you've got 20 stories that you've got to get done in a week, the amount of extra calling you're going to do gets reduced pretty drastically. I think the second part of the story is that we've been in a media environment in terms of entertainment media for 50 years that overly emphasizes what I would call propaganda and punishment porn. I mean, there's probably 20 shows every year on television that are just about how great the legal system is. And most of them resemble the actual legal system almost not at all. We have movies where vigilantes are celebrated. We have movies where police are celebrated. We have movies where violence is celebrated in every possible way. And very few movies and very few television shows that show any other narrative. And so most people have grown up. They've lived their entire life being told the fairy tale of how the justice system works, as opposed to the reality of how the justice system works. And so what we end up with is people who are already predisposed to listen to the official narratives at the same time when almost all the information they get from the actual news is from those same sources. And so those things go together, and you end up having no cognitive dissonance. You have no reason to doubt any of that stuff, and people buy into it and believe it deeply, and it becomes a huge problem for it's not that ours is a young movement, but it's that our movement has only become successful and somewhat powerful in different ways recently. So it's not that it's a new movement. People have been fighting this fight for hundreds of years, but it's a tough fight because we've got a lot of things aligned against us.
Well, let me ask you what you think about it, because one of the things that I see, right, is also this kind of right, left, either or, good, bad, journalism, right? And I'm with you. Let me kind of like stipulate that there are some amazing journalists out there. There's some amazing media professionals out there who are very committed to the craft of information dissemination and doing so in a way that I'm in awe of, right? But at the same time, what I've seen with some of the work that we've done here is that we find headwinds that are kind of like, oh, hey, you're either this or you're that. Are you on this side or that side? And it really creates a distortion around kind of the issues and the human lives impacted, right? It's kind of like, are you a hero or a villain, right? I mean, we see that even in these kind of, conversations around some of the cases being discussed right now, as opposed to what does due process mean? What does justice look like? How are the human beings all involved in this being treated, and what does it look like for our communities and our societies moving forward? Do you know what I'm saying? It seems very like the drumbeat forces you to pick a side as opposed to be on the side of an individual human being or us connecting along the lines of our shared humanity rather than some sort of label that we have to identify with.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is that it's a good idea to reject binaries as a general rule, this good, bad, up, down, whatever, I mean, I don't think that's helped us in any way, shape, or form. It may sell papers and it may get people fired up, but it's not a good way to live because it's not accurate. I mean, everybody on this listening to this probably already knows this, but people are complicated and situations are complicated. And, there's a book by Bruce Western called Homeward, and there's a quote in that book. I'm not probably going to mess it up, but it's a really, I think, important. It's that most people who've committed violent crimes were also at one time victims of crimes and witnesses to crimes. And this is based on a sociological study. And to me, that explains a lot. Hurt people hurt people. And, if you actually do something to both make people accountable for the harms that they do and try to let them make amends for the harms that they do, at the same time that you try to heal their trauma, you're going to have a lot more success than this notion of throwing someone in a hole and just assuming that somehow they're going to get better before they come back, which makes no damn sense. And so to me, what we're talking about is we have to get people to understand that simple stories are rarely true. If someone's trying to sell you a simple story, almost all the time it's not a true story. And we have to appreciate nuance and complexity. And we have to understand that human beings, I mean, I had a guy who, when I was incarcerated, who was in my pod, who you could not imagine a person who was more haunted on an everyday basis by the crime he had committed. And you could tell, I mean, if you lived with the guy like I did for over a year, that there was no moment in his life where he thought it was even possible that he could snap and kill somebody, but he did. And we have to understand that there may be some people, I don't know, who do things just because they're, incapable of whatever, that there's some kind of mental reason that they can't be fixed. I have not personally had many of those experiences. Most everyone I've come into contact with, and I've met every kind of person along the spectrum in my time, either as an activist or incarcerated, was someone who you could see the line of their life and why they ended up where they're at. And if we spent more time investing in bringing, 96% of people are coming back from incarceration. And if we spent more time investing in those people and trying to figure out how to heal them, we would have a much better system and a much more successful system.
Right on. Well, I we look forward to digging in further here, but I know that Desmond has just joined us here, so we're going to be able to jump into part 2 of this conversation, man, and continue some of that conversation. But it reminds me, man, like somebody, a good friend of mine, just a week or so ago was talking about, it's like how easy it is, right? Man, we could put somebody in jail, you could put somebody in prison in every community all across this country, but how easy is it to get into therapy? how easy it is to get into a healing space, right? Like these are good conversations, right, that come from the real experiences of so many of us. So, man, I just want to thank you, Josh, for digging in deep with us. I do need to give you a warning. I know you're going to try and convince Desmond to somehow be against Ohio State coming up against your Michigan Wolverines, but it's not going to happen. Oh, man. Oh. So anyway, I just want to say thank you for talking with us. We're going to wrap up part 1 of Our Voice podcast with Josh Hoe, and we'll be back for part 2 in just a second.